Welcome to the second part of ICEJ Canada's webinar series, of which we are proud to present to you, particularly in our 40th anniversary year. I'm Donna Holbrook, Executive Director for ICEJ Canada. If you're joining us for the first time, please visit our website at icejcanada.org and at Facebook, ICEJ Canada, to find out more about our organization following our presentation today. Last Wednesday, Susanna presented on From Medieval Anti-Semitism to COVID-19, an ancient hatred in a contemporary context. Today, she will be speaking about anti-Semitic conspiracy theories from the Protocols of the Elders of Zion to COVID-19. Our moderator is Christine Douglas-Williams, our public affairs and media consultant. She is also an award-winning journalist and author. She will now, and also from our dear friend, Dr. Susanna Kokkonen is joining us from Finland, where she's originally from. She has her doctorate from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Her expertise is in Holocaust studies. She is a world traveler and has lived and worked in several different countries. She speaks 7 languages and frequently lectures around the world on topics such as the Holocaust, anti-Semitism, and persecution. She was our director of Christian Friends of Yad Vashem for 10 years. She is a contributor on print and electronic media and often appears as a guest on TV and radio shows. And we welcome you today, everyone, and to Susanna's presentation.
Thank you so much, Donna. So before we move on to Susanna's presentation, I just want to say a couple of words before we go there. Before we move on from the medieval era to the Enlightenment and modernity. Now, from the grim days, we have to bear in mind, directly following the Holocaust to the birth of the State of Israel and international Zionism, we hear Israel and Zionism frequently maligned and in very dark ways. So where do these ideas come from, and how are they visible today, even during COVID-19? Finally, how do we react as Christians to these anti-Jewish and anti-Israel views? During our Q&A later on, we ask that you type into the chat. You'll see that little symbol that says chat, and we ask you to wait till the end of it when we get into the Q&A to start typing your questions. So without further ado, we welcome, and it's our privilege, Susanna Kokkonen. Thank you, Susanna.
Thank you very, very much. I'm very, very pleased to be here, and thanking ICEJ Canada for allowing me to be here. Let me just share my screen with you. And today we are going to start from anti-Semitic conspiracy theories by reading from the book of Isaiah. Now, I want to say that Isaiah was living in a very troubling time. There were armies that were encircling Jerusalem, and people were getting really worried. And in that situation, when they were worrying so much, instead of just looking at God of Israel and what he would be able to do for them, they were actually looking at the conspiracies, looking at the enemies. And God spoke to Isaiah, and this is what he said: "Do not say a conspiracy concerning all that these people call a conspiracy, nor be afraid of their threats, nor be troubled. The Lord of hosts, him you shall hallow. Let him be your fear, and let him be your dread. He will be as a sanctuary." And I'm saying this because the reason that I've been invited to give this particular webinar is that we are actually finding these conspiracy theories not just in the anti-Semitic movements, extreme left or extreme right, but actually being passed around by very regular people, and unfortunately, even in our community. Now, most of my material today intentionally is taken from the social media. And these pictures, you saw them already last week, because I just want to remind you that Jews have always been depicted as a virus. Virus is invisible, it's insidious, it infiltrates the body, and you don't know how to fight against it. And we can actually see that these conspiracies involve these same ideas. So what we have when we talk about conspiracies is what we call dual accusation. Dual accusation means that there are completely mutually exclusive things, but all of these things are said about the Jews. So for example, Jews are all very wealthy, but on the other hand, they are all communists, and therefore they have to live in poverty. They are Freemasons and globalists, which is international. But on the other hand, they only have tribal loyalty. They are only loyal to each other. They are all wealthy because they control world banking. But on the other hand, they are not very powerful because they have to infiltrate the society. They control media. Hollywood is very liberal, but on the other hand, it's the Zionist lobby. We have the accusation of Holocaust industry. The Jews perceive themselves as victims. But on the other hand, we have the accusation of Jewish cabal, which means like a secret plot to throw over governments and so on. So you can see here that every possible accusation can be and is being made against the Jews. And today we look at them one by one. And we want to start from this book, The Protocols of the Meetings of the Learned Elders of Zion, from 1902-1903, from Tsarist Russia, where in Russia, anti-Semitism actually was kind of state policy. What happened to the Jews at that time was that there was something called the Pale of the Settlement, and there was a certain area, in other words, where Jews were allowed to practice professions, where they were allowed to live. People were suffering terribly. There were frequent pogroms, violent attacks against the Jewish communities. And it's in this situation that Sergei Nilus, who was a religious mystic, a religious writer, he fabricated these documents, which he claimed that they were an authentic record of a meeting of the 12 tribes of very powerful Jews who were meeting to discuss how they would control the world. And these, of course, have been shown to be a complete fabrication, but they are the most influential anti-Semitic writings ever. They have been translated into countless languages, are still being sold in many different parts of the world. And you will find that this idea of this Jewish meeting, how to take over the world, that this is somehow behind most, if not all, of these conspiracy theories. So I do want you to bear in mind where this comes from, and that it's a fabrication, but you will be seeing it over and over again. So this picture here, this is supposedly a movie poster. And what do you see in this movie poster? You see that there are piles of books, but they are actually the Twin Towers, because you can recognize that there are buildings around them from New York, and then you can see the smoke. So this is a movie poster for the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. And why? Why this? Because following the protocols, Jews have been accused of all kinds of conspiracies, of all kinds of wars, terrorist attacks, and so on. So one of the most popular things that you will find is the accusation that relates to 9/11. And the accusation is that actually it was not Arab terrorists, it had nothing to do with them, but it was Israel and the United States that actually committed this act of terror. And there is this frequent accusation that is being repeated that Jews did not go to work that day because they had been warned that that day there would be an attack. Now, I want to bring in the facts, and the fact is that we know that the Mossad, the Israeli Secret Service, had actually been warning the CIA that there might be an attack coming. What do we know else? We know that there were Jews who died in 9/11. So in order for us to believe that the Americans and the Israelis committed this horrible, horrible thing, we would completely have to ignore the facts. But that is how conspiracy theories work. Facts are not so important if you believe something like this. So it's not just 9/11. It's also the murder of JFK. Countless things are being contributed, and somehow the Protocols of the Elders of Zion is behind it. And here you see it in a very visual kind of way. The other accusation, and I'm presenting this here because it relates to Tsar's Russia as well, is the accusation that Jews are communists. And this was one of the main things that Adolf Hitler was arguing before he came to power. It was one of the main things that he was saying, so people in Germany would vote for him because there was a great fear of communism. So now, what we have to bear in mind is that this is not actually a lecture on communism or other things. We are only looking at it from the perspective of understanding what is being said in an anti-Semitic kind of context. So at the background, we have Russia under the Tsars, who have a secret police that is very effective and very cruel. People are still living in slavery. The situation is unbearable to many people. So the revolution of 1917 is very welcome. It's the first time that many people feel that they have a chance to contribute to what is going on in that country. Most people are happy to get rid of the Tsar and all the related people. During World War II, the Soviet Union, that's the name then, is showing great heroism in fighting in Leningrad, in Stalingrad, in liberating Auschwitz, coming all the way to Berlin, and so on and so forth. But then something happens with Stalin. He's very suspicious of people, like most dictators are. And there is like a cleansing campaign. And I'm not talking about ethnic cleansing, because he doesn't discriminate against anyone. Anybody who is suspected of disloyalty would be sent to Siberia or would be just murdered. And there's a complete suppression of national identities. And I know that very well because there were many Finnish people who were living on that side of the border, and they also suffered terribly or were just simply murdered by Stalin. Now, why is this important? I'm coming to the point. My point is that some Jews supported the communist movement. There were some Jews who were fighting for the revolution. And there were others who were not. And during this campaign to suppress national identities, Jews are in no better position than anybody else. You might know about the refuseniks, Jews who wanted to leave the Soviet Union, who wanted to come to Israel. And there was a great movement. ICEJ was part of it. But it was very, very difficult, if not impossible, to leave. So they suffered from the same things like everybody else did. And then when the state of Israel was founded, originally the Soviet Union supported the founding of the state of Israel. It's possible that they were thinking that this would be an outpost for them in the Middle East. And that didn't happen. So what did they do? They started actually arming Israel's enemies. So Egypt and Syria, for example, had any number of military advisors from the Soviet Union, and they had a lot of weapons they were receiving from them. So this was the influence in the Middle East. In addition, actually, with the agreement or closing of ICE by the Soviet Union leaders, terrorists were murdered in Eastern Europe. So that's another aspect. And the third aspect is that actually the Soviet Union many times was leading a kind of anti-Israel campaign in the UN. So now this accusation that Jews are being accused of being communists, or the state of Israel even sometimes is being accused of being a communist state. Israel is a very pluralistic society. You have all kinds of opinions. It's a democracy. So I find this accusation very unrealistic. And I think we need to be aware that usually people don't really know what happened in the Soviet Union, and they don't really know what was the influence of the Soviet Union in the Middle East. And I want to come to this next idea. Whenever you see this word Cabal, even if it doesn't include the word Jewish, just Cabal, you have to know that it's an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. There are some other explanations about what the word means, but most researchers believe that it came from the word Kabbalah, which everybody knows is a Jewish mystic tradition. It came from the French language into English. And in 1606, that's the first time when it's being used as a political word. In 1642, there was the English Civil War, and that's the first time when it was used in this very specific meaning, plot. A secret plot to overthrow a government, a secret plot against the society, conspiracy, people meeting in secret. But usually when you see it today, it usually has the association of meaning Jews who are engaged or united in secret designs against the government or against our way of living. And often it goes hand in hand with these expressions, Zionist plot, the Zionist plot to take over the world, world dominion, and things like that. And now I have a picture here, and I intentionally use this picture because I want to make a point. So in this picture, you see that it says Jewish Voice for Peace, and then it has a Palestinian or an Arab person who is running away, and then the Israeli soldier. But the point that I want to make is that Jewish Voice for Peace is a real organization. It exists, and it advocates for far-reaching compromises in terms of the Israeli territory, because it's the voice for peace, and they believe that by giving up more land, they'll be able to reach this peace. But the point here is that this is not an organization that anybody would think in those terms, you know, with the soldier who is running after this Palestinian. So my point is that these theories and ideas are mostly very misguided, because this would show a complete lack of understanding of what actually this organization is and what is happening and what do they advocate for. The other accusation that is made against Jews very, very often is the accusation that they are Freemasons. And again, this is not a lecture about Freemasonry. So I'm not going to talk about it as a religious or like a kind of club or system. I'm only talking about it in the context of anti-Semitic ideas. So what do we know about Freemasonry? First of all, that it's most common in Britain, in the former Commonwealth countries, which would include Canada, and in general in the English-speaking world. We also know that there have been court cases that have been made against certain lodges of Freemasons because they discriminated against Catholics, against Jews, and non-whites. In other words, their membership was only open to white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. They were persecuted in Nazi Germany, and according to Adolf Hitler, they are a Jewish conspiracy and therefore they were persecuted. They were banned in much of Europe for centuries. They were completely banned in the Soviet Union and the satellite communist countries, and they are still today banned in most of the Islamic world. Now, is Freemasonry Jewish? Because that's the accusation. So when you look at the symbol that I have here, you see a cross, you see the Star of David, and you see this kind of like a snake. Usually the reason why people say that it's Jewish is either because they just want to make an anti-Semitic accusation, or because they have seen the Star of David in some of these pictures and materials. But the Freemasonry actually doesn't prefer one religion over another. The whole thing is that every religion is okay. They believe in a supreme being, but they don't believe in one way of meeting with that supreme being. So what I want to say is that there are Jewish Freemasons and there are non-Jewish Freemasons. And also we know that it is a kind of white Protestant movement. So my argument is that whatever we think about Freemasonry or whatever we know about Freemasonry, but the point is that it's no more Jewish than it's non-Jewish. You know, it's kind of tolerant of any religion, any religious idea, and therefore I don't think that we can really say that it's somehow a Jewish thing specifically. I'm coming now to the heart of the matter, because communism and Freemasonry, these are just like ideas, but now we are actually coming to something that is also practical. We are coming to banking. And this is a frequent accusation against the Jews that they are all bankers, or that Jewish bankers control the whole world. So I want to start from something a little bit different today. And I want to say that the Bible, the Torah, but also the New Testament, has a lot to say about this issue. So if you think about the very first stories of the Bible, the beginning of the Torah, you will realize that actually there are several financial transactions that are described in great detail in the Bible. But not only that, there is also a whole code. How do you conduct finances? How are you fair when you are dealing with money? And it's kind of a reflection on what kind of society God wanted to create for his people. But it's also, I think, a reflection on how we as human beings need these rules, because otherwise we might not be as honest as God wants us to be. Some of you might be thinking, well, but what about the New Testament? Well, what about it? Jesus himself didn't hesitate to speak out on financial matters, and he was meticulous in paying taxes, even if he didn't have to, but he did. So I'm saying all of this because I want to say that it's no wonder then that in the Middle Ages, when banking is one of the very few professions that Jews are allowed to practice, that actually we find something very interesting happening, because we find that even the tsars, who are very anti-Semitic, kings, and even popes, they prefer Jewish bankers. Why do they prefer Jewish bankers? Quite possibly because they know that they will be honest and they are going to deal with their money as well as they would with their own. So we find this since the Middle Ages, and it's very fascinating because we have, on the other hand, these accusations against the Jews, but then we also have this belief that it's better to deal through the Jewish bankers. So the accusations that are usually made against the Jews in this context, they relate to inordinate wealth. And then, of course, if somebody owes money, they don't like to pay extra for that. And then of controlling the nations through banking. So how did the banking system work in the Middle Ages? You might have a Jewish family that might be from Spain. So they might have family in Spain. They might have family in Venice. Venice was a very important part of this whole system for economy in that time. And then they might have people under the Sultan in Turkey. So they would give them a note, and the person would take the note to another country, and then they would be able to receive money against that note. So this banking system works so well because there's like an international family connection. But then that also becomes the accusation that is made that the Jewish families are very international, and then they are controlling through banking all these nations. And I want you to look at this picture, the bottom picture. This is very, very common in Arab TV. Sometimes, of course, even in the social media in our countries, where the name Rothschild is very often used as a kind of curse word. It's used to indicate something evil. And you can see that there is like a peak. And then there's ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Israel, UK, the USA, and so on. And they are all kind of getting their nutrition from that peak. So this is how, what kind of accusations are being made. And in this other picture, you see that there are the dollar notes, that this man he looks like, kind of has the same face like the Jewish virus in the first pictures that I showed you. And he is, of course, the capitalist, but he's Jewish, so he's controlling all these Gentiles who are like totally helpless in his hands. And then below him, you see this man who also is Jewish, and you see this dollar sign and the money. And here it says private, because the frequent accusation is being made that there's some kind of secret meeting of these bankers where they decide on things. So Jews are being perceived as international and as wealthy. And then real money is kind of the practical idea of what they are being accused of. And this capitalism, extreme capitalism and communism accusation, they coexist and they go together. And related to this, I'm showing you a picture because this picture has been recently circulating in the social media. So I want you to know the whole story of what is the story behind this picture. So this picture is actually a mural, and it was actually painted in the London's East End in 2012. Now, you might be wondering why I'm talking about 2012, but the reason is that this picture has suddenly become very much in vogue in the social media. So I want us to look at the picture first together before I talk more. So in the picture, you have this orange kind of like fiery colors at the background, which usually indicates apocalypse. Something terrible is about to happen, or something terrible is happening in the world. And these colors are an indicator because they refer to fire, perhaps ashes. And then you have these men who are sitting and playing Monopoly game. And if you look at them closely, you have the dollar notes, of course, so there's no hesitation. We recognize what this is. And their table are these hunched bodies. We don't know who they are, but we understand what is happening here. These men are somehow suppressing these people, and they are playing their Monopoly game on the backs of these hunched people. Some of the faces of the men who are playing the game are recognizable as Jewish bankers. And behind them, we have this sign with the eye, and this is frequently presented as the sign of the Illuminati, which is a theory of a secret conspiracy. And we, of course, understand that the pyramid with an eyeball on it, that this is also a sign that is connected with the Freemasons and so on, so forth. And then on the left, we have a man, and he's holding a sign with a text. And this man, he's wearing this olive green clothing, and he's also somehow on fire, maybe for his cause. He looks like a revolutionary to me, and there have been different names that have been suggested who he could be. And the text says, "The New World Order is an enemy of humanity." So this picture is painted in East End. Why in East End? Well, East End, the particular place where this picture was painted on this mural, that used to be a very Jewish area. So there was a great controversy. Councillors from that town council were very upset, and there's a whole discussion that you would be able to find online. This was widely reported in the media. And finally, this mural was removed. So why is this picture making the rounds in the social media now? That is interesting. So let me say something about the artist. The artist calls himself, this is his artist name, Mir1 or Mir1. He's from the USA. And he defines himself as being anti-establishment. Now, let's think about this for a moment. Most artists, if they are accused of painting something anti-Semitic, most of them would apologize. Maybe not for the picture, but for the hurt they have caused. Most of them would try to backtrack, and they would say, no, this was not meant to be like that, but not this one. This one actually said that he is against the ruling class. Bankers are Jewish. So this picture is correctly presented. There are indeed Jewish bankers in this picture. And the problem is that this is a very old accusation. We have to see this picture in light of what we know about anti-Semitism. And now, when this picture is going around in the social media, of course, it's an anti-establishment picture. So if you have a problem with the establishment, however you choose to define what that is, then this picture might be one you want to share. I have seen it being passed around in an anti-mask context. But here's the thing, if you are watching this, I think you should go and look at the website of this artist. Because whenever you promote a piece of art, you are not only promoting that picture, you are promoting the worldview the artist has. So this artist has a certain kind of worldview, is engaged in certain kind of things that you can find on his website, and then you can make a decision if this is something you think you should be promoting. I come to our next accusation, and this is about Hollywood. So Hollywood, of course, has Jewish beginnings. There were many Jewish film studio owners. They came to America and they started building Hollywood. They started building the studios. Although Hollywood, there are some excellent books that have been made about the beginnings of cinema and of Hollywood particularly, of course, has always been mixed. There are all kinds of people, all kinds of studio owners or artists and actors and so on. But yes, it had somewhat Jewish beginnings. And now some people say that the Jewishness of these people was limited to what they were eating. In other words, we are not talking about people who were maybe very close to their Judaism in terms of religion, but they were Jewish. And then in the 1940s, we have the Un-American Activities Committee. And I'm pretty sure that everybody heard about it and everybody knows that it was an anti-communist committee. But what many people don't know is that it was also very, very anti-Semitic. It was anti-communist and anti-Semitic. And it was very difficult for some of these Jewish studio owners in Hollywood. And that kind of started changing the trend in Hollywood. Nowadays, when we are talking about what is the main accusation, we look at this picture, we see that there is the flag of Israel that is put above Hollywood. But in that flag, we have the swastika intertwined with the Star of David. There's a dual accusation that is very, very strong and very identifiable here. And it is the accusation that Hollywood is too liberal, that we don't like their movies because those movies are shaping our society into very liberal values, into very liberal directions. But on the other hand, Hollywood is controlled by Israel, is controlled by the Zionists. And these two accusations cannot really coexist because usually Zionism doesn't go so well together with leftist very liberal ideologies. And I do want to say another thing, just purely focusing on films, that if you think about films in the maybe past 10 years, maybe 2 decades, we have seen more films that have actually depicted Jewish life in America. But before that, we might have had a Jewish character, or we might have a film about the Holocaust. But actually, many of these Jewish studio owners, we didn't feel very comfortable in sharing too much of their Jewish experience in the films. So this is just something to think about when you next time hear this accusation. And this is related to it because we have here the accusation of Shoah business. So we have show business, but now it's called Shoah business, Shoah being the word for Holocaust in Hebrew. So there is an accusation that Jews are using the Holocaust for financial gain and perhaps for political gain. And I do want to mention here that Norman Finkelstein in the year 2000 wrote a book about this. And he actually launched this concept, Holocaust industry. And his point was that Israel was being presented as a victim because of the Holocaust. And so America was supporting Israel politically because of this victim mentality. And he also expanded his accusations a little bit later. And he started saying that, for example, the Swiss banks, that they were paying too much money for the victims of the Holocaust and things like that. And many mainstream historians completely refuted these arguments. Holocaust survivors such as Elie Wiesel actually called him a Holocaust denier. But I do think that it's very important that we are aware about these accusations and that we are aware that Holocaust survivors actually refer to this as a form of Holocaust denial. And now I'm coming closer to our own time, meaning COVID-19. So Iran, as a nation, has suffered terribly from coronavirus. Many of Iranian leaders have become sick, infected. Some of the satellite photography has shown like open pits for bodies. And there is a suspicion that Iranians do not know and are not sharing with the outside world how many people have died, and the healthcare system has completely collapsed. So it's no wonder then that the Iranians first made the accusation that Israel was spreading coronavirus. They connected it with the United States as well. This accusation spread to Turkey, to Arab media, and then unfortunately also to our social media. So here in this picture, the one above, you can see that Israel is literally showing spreading the virus. And then below it, we see the picture where the lungs are white because of the virus, but they are kind of shaped the same way that the map of Israel is shaped. And then there is white color indicating how Palestinians, how much land they have lost for the virus of Israel. So this is an accusation that I mentioned last time, that Israel is said to spread the virus, but here it's connected with the Palestinian issue. So Jews are spreading the virus, but they can also be infected. The FBI found out that there was a whole campaign, go to a Jewish community if you are sick and try to transmit the virus to as many people as possible. You can see here that it's drawing on these very ancient accusations. I don't even want to read what is written here, you can see it. And the people who are engaged in this are Holocaust deniers, of course, and then, of course, very extreme right-wing who maybe believe in the accusation, but also want to do this, what they call Holocaust, for the Holocaust. And now this topic here, anti-lockdown, anti-mask. So again, this is not any kind of lecture on health issues. So I'm only reporting to you in what I have seen about anti-Semitism. So we have had demonstrations against wearing masks and against the lockdown in different countries and so on. And these demonstrations very unfortunately have also had very anti-Jewish tones. Jewish mayors in more than one city in the United States have been met with the Nazi salute. Holocaust-related symbols, such as the yellow Star of David, the yellow armband that the Jews had to wear in Nazi Germany and other areas, these have been used in some of these demonstrations. And as you may know, inappropriate use of Holocaust-related symbols is a form of Holocaust denial. Now, COVID-19 is supposedly a lie. And again, this is not a lecture about COVID-19, but if you have seen people who suffered from COVID-19, then you know that actually it's not a lie. Research on vaccine, research on COVID-19 is supposedly Jewish science and is not to be trusted. And I know that this could be quite sensitive to some of us. We might feel this way or that way about the lockdown or the mask, but it's very important for us to see if things are taking an anti-Semitic turn. And here in this picture, you can see the flag of Israel, but where we have the Star of David, we have a rat. And the expression that has been used is that the Jews are our real problem. In other words, the Jews are somehow behind this virus. Somehow the Jews are benefiting from the lockdown or from other people having to wear the mask. Completely inappropriate comparisons have been made between mask wearing and what happened in Nazi Germany. And again, I have to remind us that that is considered a form of Holocaust denial. And I want to give you as a resource an article written by Ron Cantor. Many of you know Ron Cantor, who is a major Messianic Jewish leader, but also considered a leader in the evangelical community, somebody who knows our community extremely well. So if you go to this website, messiahsmandate.org, you will find his article, Does the Bible Speak to Mask Wearing? And I'm offering it just as a perspective on this situation. And I'm coming to another thing that is also happening right now, and that is, of course, Black Lives Matter. So what we can observe at this time during COVID-19 is that anti-Semitism, I mean, we would like to think that it comes from lunatics, that it comes from the extreme left or extreme right, but it's actually coming from all directions. For me personally, this is the first time that I have been so confused in the social media just watching where these things are actually coming from. So Black Lives Matter is another layer to this whole thing that is happening right now. So the BLM movement has openly supported and supports PDS movement, the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement against Israel, which seeks to delegitimize the state of Israel, seeks to actually to get government sanctions against the state of Israel, and also seeks to spread propaganda against Israel all over the world. So this already means that this movement is not a friend of Israel. But now, during these demonstrations, what we have been able to see is that this idea of intersectionality has become extremely strong. So intersectionality is the belief that all these multiple forms of discrimination have something in common. In other words, women are being discriminated against, gays are being discriminated against, blacks are being discriminated against, and so on and so forth. And whoever is doing the discriminating in each particular situation, somehow these forms of discrimination share some kind of common basis. But for me, this is the first time that I have seen it so openly expressed that Israel is an oppressor of the Palestinians. Jews support Israel. This is the common belief. Jews support Israel. They are also part of what they call the establishment. And therefore, this whole thing of Jews supporting Israel, this is oppression. And this oppression then somehow is also oppression against the blacks in the United States. In order to be able to maintain this idea, you have to do creative thinking. So I'm going to mention one thing. Israel has a very good record worldwide, globally, about gays, about gay rights. So what do you do when you say that Israel is an oppressor of the Palestinians, but the gays are a particular group that is discriminated against, and Israel has a good record in that matter? You call it pink washing. Pink washing is actually the term that is being used, and it means that you are using gay rights to hide what you are doing in oppressing another group. So What I'm saying is that right now in the world, we have anti-Semitism coming from all directions, and it's coming from the right and from the left. And the situation is extremely confusing. And then this one. Well, so when I have been working over this summer and last spring on these presentations, I was very, very shocked when I saw that a picture where I'm actually present in that situation, but I'm outside this picture frame, is being used as evidence of Jewish conspiracy. So in this picture, we have Pope Franciscus, and I was present in the Hall of Remembrance at Yad Vashem when he made his historic visit in May 2015. So I'm kind of behind the survivors. The survivors are the ones wearing the black kippas. And Pope Franciscus was so moved by the moment that he actually took their hands and he kissed each survivor's hand. Next to him is standing the chairman of Yad Vashem, Avner Shalev. Now imagine my shock when I know what this picture is, I know what it presents, I know the context. I was there in that room when it was taken, and I see it, and it's used as evidence of a Jewish conspiracy. This is extremely important for us to realize that pictures are taken out of context. Words, sentences, books, religious texts are taken out of context. Democratic activity, such as lobbying, which is my right and your right when we live in democracy, is shown as something evil and sinister. And finally, it is the Jews that are overwhelmingly targets of hate. And this includes actually the United States and Canada. So this is where we are. So this is my last slide before our Q&A. Who spreads hate? So we need to have the critical skills of separating fact from fiction. We are not to believe anonymous sources. We are not to believe people who copy and paste, who share things they didn't write themselves, who share pictures they didn't write themselves. Because how do you know who put that picture online and what are they wanting to do with it? What is their purpose? What do they want to accomplish? So I am appealing again to the Bible, because the Bible speaks into everything. 2 Timothy 1:7, Paul says, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." So what is a sound mind in this context? So I just wrote myself these 3 things. 1, do you know the source? Do you know who took that picture? Do you know who first posted it? Do you know who wrote that line? 2, did you check the accuracy? Is it a picture that was photoshopped? Did that person really say those words? What was the context? And 3, when you post that post, who are you helping? Are you helping a hate group? Are you helping a foreign government? Who are you helping? And my final resource for you, Dr. Michael Brown, whom all of you know, who is very well respected and who knows our community, evangelical community, intimately. He wrote recently an article, "The Rising Tide of Christian Anti-Semitism in America." You can find it in this website, mychristiandaily.com. He is very worried about anti-Semitism rising in our community. So thank you very, very much for having me today, and I'm going to hand it back to ICEJ Canada.